I view NATO as potentially good, but we've got to get some good thinking in NATO. It's very unfair what's been happening. Until I came along, we were paying close to 100% of NATO. So think of it, we're paying 100% of their military, and they're screwing us on trade.
It's no secret, President Donald Trump and NATO doesn't seem eye to eye. From media blows-ups to threatening withdrawal, the fate of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization hangs in the balance. But what happens if the United States pulls out and leverages sanctions on the countries? It probably won't happen, but the world has never been closer to seeing the West implode. This is what will happen if NATO comes face-to-face with the might of Uncle Sam. Before we jump in, about 90% of our viewers are not currently subscribed to our channel. We would love it if you can join our community, plus it is absolutely free. The current situation in the United States is on edge, with reciprocal tariffs taking center stage.
A discounted reciprocal tariff of 34%. I think, in other words, they charge us, we charge them less, so how can anybody be upset?
No one knows what to expect, and both President Donald Trump and European Union leader Ursula von der Leyen have been at each other's throats. Both parties remain a strong partner of NATO, meaning that military intervention has not yet been on the table. However, Donald Trump's threats of possibly leaving NATO might just put a military intervention on the table.
When I came to NATO, when I first had my first meeting, I noticed that people weren't paying their bills at all. And I said I should wait till my second meeting, and I did. And I brought that up, and I said, if you don't pay your bills, we're not going to participate, we're not going to protect you.
But this will not be the US to make the first move. As Trump has told reporters on many occasions, there is a big ocean that separates these allies. But what could set off a spark? Well, if the United States leaves NATO and continues its America First policy of tariffs, it will essentially cripple the European economy. This means that what's left of NATO will have no choice but to fight. Essentially, it will be economic pressure that drives the EU to make a move on the United States, which will stem from a place of utter desperation. But if you wake up one morning, turn on the news, and see the HMS Queen Elizabeth off the coast of Florida, it might be time to buckle up for a bumpy ride. Before we look at how such an invasion will play out, it is important to address the elephant in the room. In this case, it is Canada. The Great White North has been a big player in NATO since the late 1940s and has been sharing both military and intelligence with its counterparts across the Atlantic. But what will Canada do if such an invasion happens? Well, we have created two videos that discuss what might possibly happen. First of all, the US will likely launch a preemptive strike on Canada before European ships make it halfway through the Atlantic. On the other hand, Canada could partner with the US. In another video we created covering what would happen if the United States, Canada, and Mexico all became one nation. Make sure you check them out after this video. Links will be in the description. Regardless, Canada will likely be useless if the US neutralizes them, and if NATO reaches the country sooner, it will likely become a safe haven and remote base for NATO troops. In either case, the US will have this covered. So how will NATO approach such an invasion? The latest data shows that the EU has approximately 1.4 million active service troops. Add another 148,000 British troops, and NATO will field about 1.6 million active servicemen. On the other hand, the United States has approximately 2.1 million troops, with 1.3 being active military personnel. This looks rather great for the US being able to match whatever Europe sends their way. But keep in mind that large battalions of these troops are stationed all over the world, and the US will likely not be willing to move them and lose their strategic advantage. NATO has a similar problem, meaning the battlefield should be even when it comes to boots on the ground. However, the big difference comes in the form of military equipment. The United boasts an impressive 13,000 aircraft. These are split between cargo, fighters, attack, bombers, and interceptors. Not to mention things like the F-117 Nighthawk, which has a main purpose of doing reconnaissance. On the other hand, the EU can only put about 8,100 aircraft on the battlefield, with the Royal British Air Force adding a couple hundred to bring it to roughly 9,000. In terms of the Navy, the EU holds a very narrow advantage. The USA has approximately 470 naval vessels or warships, compared to a formidable force of 576 combined for both the UK and the EU. But there is a catch, and that comes from the quality of these ships. Since the war will be waged over the Atlantic, it is important to understand what ships the United States have, and the 11 aircraft carrier strike groups could wipe out a large chunk of the NATO Navy. Moreover, the battle for air superiority will likely fall to the United States. With the F-22 and F-35 as two of the most powerful fifth-generation fighters, it will be hard for the Eurofighter Typhoon and Dassault Rafale to compete. Yes, many EU countries have the F-35, but the United States has touted the possibility of these aircraft having a kill switch controlled by the Pentagon. If this is the case, it will feel like fighting tanks with a bow and arrow. Simply not possible unless you are a video game enthusiast. Moreover, we haven't even scratched the surface by looking at various bombs and drones that the United States has developed far beyond what the EU is capable of. But how would such a war look? Thanks to advanced radar and satellite technology, the US will spot incoming NATO vessels from hundreds of miles away. This should give Washington more than enough time to prepare. Since these are nuclear superpowers, we will eliminate this from the battlefield as both parties will try to reduce human casualties. So instead of seeing a fleet of British naval vessels off the East Coast, the US will likely send its own naval forces to meet these incoming fleets in the middle of the Atlantic. This means that NATO will struggle to even reach US shores. Moreover, the EU could launch cruise and ballistic missiles, but with advanced anti-air defenses, this will likely be shot down almost immediately. Just look at how effective the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System has been in defending Israel from persistent Iranian attacks. This advanced anti-air battery will likely be used to stop missiles, while jamming technology will look to disrupt communications of guided missiles and render them useless. In all essence, a NATO attack will fall flat just as soon as it starts. This leaves the door open to a US counterattack, which President Trump might consider as a way of deterring any future invasions. Once EU fleets are wiped out in the Atlantic, the United States will slowly move within striking distance of EU territory. The Gadfin Spirit X drone has a range of approximately 311 miles or 500 kilometers, and the Trident II D5 ballistic missile can reach 7,500 miles. This means the United States will always carry the risk of these incoming arms. It is likely that the use of B-2 Spirit will be used to take out many of these missile sites, while anti-submarine vehicles like the Type 26 frigate will be deployed to render many of these submarines useless. However, invading Europe will be a completely different thing. In fact, it will be virtually impossible for the United States to launch a ground invasion of Europe without taking too many casualties. The most likely scenario would be bombing raids on key European infrastructure, in an attempt to force the EU into submission. Moreover, the US will also attempt to block all trade, but it is the economic warfare that will probably take center stage. In the modern world, global economics are all intertwined. The estimated goods traded between the United States and the EU are estimated to be worth $975 billion. Should trade between these superpowers stop, it will lead to rampant inflation for the EU and US. The global stock markets will slowly implode, leading to a recession, or more worrisome, could be a possible economic depression. This will lead to widespread poverty and even uprisings locally. All of these moves will force nations to come to the negotiation tables, bringing such a war to an abrupt end. In fact, this is already playing out on a global stage. Since the introduction of reciprocal tariffs by President Donald Trump on March 9, 2025, it didn't take long for EU nations to quickly strike a deal.
These tariffs come first and foremost at immense costs for US consumers and businesses. We stand ready to negotiate with the United States. Indeed, we have offered 0 for 0 tariffs for industrial goods, as we have successfully done with many other trading partners.
The deal will likely see a 0 for 0 tariff, meaning that neither the US nor the EU will suffer. As for the casualties, well, poverty will increase this number far higher than any bullet. Once medical infrastructure fails, and people are left to fight for meals, the secondary casualties will be enormous. It will essentially be an unwinnable war, regardless of which side you support. Meanwhile, the rest of the world will suffer as well, but the biggest winners will be China and Russia. As the US and EU turn their focus to one another, Ukraine will likely fall in a matter of months. Just an example of this is the number of munitions fired by each country. In 2024, Ukraine could launch approximately 2,000 shells per day. This is about 20% of the 10,000 a day Russia could launch. So, Ukraine will fall, giving rise to a second Soviet Union. Even more horrific will be the possibility of Russia invading NATO countries. Essentially, Europe will be fighting a war on two fronts, one from its western shores and the other from the east. The Chinese will likely make a move on Taiwan and Japan. Without any real focus from the United States, both will fall to China in a matter of weeks. Considering China's non-intervention policy and promise to ensure peace, the Chinese economy might actually thrive. In the aftermath, the People's Republic of China will emerge as the ultimate global superpower. Now, such a war is not realistic and will likely never happen. But how do you think it will play out? Make sure to let us know in the comments. Also, check out our previous 2 videos on what will happen if the US invades Canada and how the world will change if the North American countries unite.